This is a story from my childhood. I'm in my 30s now. I grew up in the Northeast U.S. My family liked to spend time in the woods, and we had a cabin and often stayed there in the summer. I had a very traumatic childhood. My grandfather died when I was 4, and I took it really hard. I completely quit talking for about a month or so. I can't remember the not talking part, but I remember the nightmares from that time. Night after night, I would have a terrible dream where I was alone in the woods, and I would try to find my way out. I would run into this awful demon that had a deer skull for a head and something like a human skeleton for a body, wrapped in tight gray skin. Once I would see it, all I could feel was absolute loneliness, and I would wake up screaming. The nightmares continued for about a month or so, then they slowly faded away. My kindergarten teacher told my mom I could probably use professional help, but I started speaking again shortly after, so my mom thought everything was fine. I'll never forget those nightmares. When I was a teenager, I couldn't sleep one night, and I started watching this movie on TV about 2 in the morning. It was called Wendigo. Once I saw the Wendigo, I nearly had a panic attack. It was almost exactly what I saw when I was young. This depiction had a deer head, not a deer skull, but that was really the only difference. And this movie was only made relatively recently. I read up on the Wendigo, and at the time I saw it in my dreams, I did feel desperately isolated and alone. It made me afraid to go into the woods by myself for years. You could try to rationalize it and think that I must have seen or heard about it before having the nightmares when I was little, but I don't think that's the case. And I think there's something kind of weird going on here.
We take our 2 dogs outside to their kennels so they can get out of the house for a while and run and play. These are not small dogs. One is a black lab husky mix, and the other is a full-blooded Staffordshire Terrier, or a pit bull. The kennels are placed at the edge of the yard near the woods. These woods are oversized, large enough to take a day to go hiking through them. Lately, when it gets dark, the dogs seem on edge. They will bark and whine toward the house to come in. At first, I thought they just wanted to get back into the house, but now I think they're actually scared. 3 nights ago, when I went to get them, it was already pretty dark, but we have a security light, so it's not like it's pitch black or anything. I got to the front of the first kennel and noticed both dogs were absolutely silent. They constantly bark at me excitedly when I go to them, but they are dead silent this time. This weirded me out a little, but not to the point of being scared. I will admit that there was a certain uneasiness in the air though, something I can't quite explain. But it's sort of like an electric feeling, like I was about to be shocked. The longer I was there, the more uneasy I felt. I started getting out the first dog, the lab, and heard a heavy snap in the woods near the kennels. I froze. The dogs froze. By this time, I was so on edge that if someone had spoken, I would have jumped, screamed, and possibly ran for my entire life. The creepy feeling in the air just kept getting thicker. The lab had put her bushy tail stuffed underneath her and was whining. This didn't make me feel any better. The pit bull was as far away from the woods as she could be, whimpering for me to come get her. I can only take one dog in at a time because they get too excited and sometimes try to fight, so I avoid that at all cost. I felt so bad leaving the pitty there by herself, but I had to do it. As I walked away, she barked this high-pitched whining type of bark at me that I had never heard her do before. The lab could not get to the house quick enough. I went back for the other one and dreaded every step as her door was to the base of the woods. I would have to turn my back to the woods to open her door and get her out. As I approached the kennel, the air felt heavy and stale, with an unpleasant smell like a dead skunk. Another snap and I was ready to run for it, but I didn't want to leave my dog, who had her head defensively facing the woods. I could barely make it. It felt like trying to walk through water. I was terrified by the time I reached the door. I heard heavy breathing behind me as I got my dog out. She was scared, but started growling behind me. I was frozen in place. The breathing continued for at least a minute before I heard steps coming toward us. We both took off at the same time. A terrifying scream came from the base of the woods. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. My pity pulled me back to the house. I got in, flipped off all the lights, and stared out the window at the woods. I could see something moving slightly, but just out of my sight. It moved back and forth about 5 times, then disappeared. It took me forever to fall asleep because I was so scared that every little noise freaked me the heck out. The next night I went to get the dogs earlier. Right around dusk, I thought all was good until I was getting my pitty out. A very loud snapping sound rang out as a tree branch had just been snapped in half. It sounded far away, so I hurriedly got my dog and started walking toward the house. A few steps from the kennel, I heard something big that started charging toward me from inside the woods. We ran again, which appeared to follow for so long, then retreat. Now, every night since then I hear sounds coming out of the woods like branches breaking and being thrown around, knocking on trees and roaring. I am terrified. I no longer take my dogs down there. I take them for walks instead during the day and make sure we are all in before dusk. I don't know what to do. I'm thinking about buying a gun, but I'm not sure it will help.
It was early December when me and a couple of friends were camping for a few days. My friend has an uncle who owns a cabin out in Alaska. Apparently, his grandfather built that cabin himself, and it was passed down in his family until finally it got to him. It was a small, beautiful place, consisting of 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a small living space. His uncle had cleaned up the place a little bit, on the inside anyway. There was plenty of space in front of the house, so we decided to set up camp there. We were having a lot of fun, hiking, making s'mores, telling stories, but little did we know that this trip itself would become its own story. It was the 3rd night of us staying there, and as we gathered around the campfire, his uncle wanted to tell us all a story. He began with, "I want to tell you all a story about something that happened here." All of us got comfortable in our chairs and were ready for a good story. He goes on to say that a young kid once got lost here, and he was accepted by a pack of wolves. He lived like them and did everything they did. My uncle explained that he even liked one of the female wolves in the pack. Eventually, they did somehow have a child. Now at this point, we were laughing around the campfire, as we all knew that this story was far from true. But the uncle ignored us and he went on. He says that the child of the boy and the wolves still lives and that he patrols this territory every full moon. And it just so happened that when we looked up, there was a full moon in the sky, and a few of us chuckled again. After that, we called it a night and went to bed. We took it as a joke. We took it as a story that was supposed to be scary, but instead came off as silly. Besides, something like that doesn't even seem possible. I'm not one to believe in fairy tales. That night, though, we were suddenly awakened by a loud howl. It sounded way too close. It echoed all around us, and we began to panic. We armed ourselves with pocket knives and machetes. It was dark, and we could not tell where it was coming from. But soon we could make out a figure that was standing over on a hill nearby. This figure was coming towards us. We started yelling for help, and in our panic, we were unable to exit the tent. I was sure that this chaos would ultimately be our doom. Soon, that thing was only about 15 yards away from the tent and getting closer by the second. And from this distance, I could see that it was huge, especially tall. But before it came closer, the door to the cabin nearby slammed open, and we suddenly heard the booming sound of a shotgun being fired. I watched as the thing's ears perked up. Then it turned and ran on all fours away. When we all climbed out of the tent, we saw the uncle there with the shotgun. He looked at us serious, as if to say, "I told you so." But me, along with the rest of my friends, we couldn't speak a word. We stood there in silence and disbelief. We pretended to sleep in the cabin that night. And the moment the sun came up, we packed our stuff and we left. After that, we've never seen anything like that again.
Author's note. This story comes from a friend of mine that I used to share an apartment with. I interpreted it as a werewolf encounter at the time, but have since learned about skinwalkers and am leaning more towards that explanation now. A creepy story either way. My roommate, a guy we'll call Jim, spent his high school years in a little town in eastern Wyoming. I can't recall the name of the town, but it was the kind of place that most people had forgotten about since the trains had stopped coming through. It was a very weird little town, and most of the people living there seemed to be very paranoid. A lot of parents would not let their children play outside after dark, and all unfamiliar faces were regarded with suspicion. Since the town was miles away from the nearest McDonald's or movie theater or shopping mall, there was nothing for young people to do but get shit-faced drunk. That's what Jim and his friends were planning to do on the night that this story takes place. A fellow classmate was having a kegger at his parents' house that night, which was 20 miles out of town on a dirt road somewhere. Jim had reservations about driving out there in the dark because that general area was known to be sort of creepy at night. But his friends really wanted to go, and he was the only one with a car. So, after some coaxing, Jim and about 5 of his friends pile into his Buick and head out of town. About half an hour later, they realize that they are lost. They can't find the road that they are supposed to turn on, and it's too dark to read any of the signs. They haven't seen any houses or cars for a while, so they figure they must have taken a wrong turn somewhere and decide to head back to the main road. After turning the car around and driving in the opposite direction for a few miles, Jim spots something in the middle of the road up ahead. His friend in the passenger seat notices it at the same time and says, "What the fuck is that, dude?" At first, they can't tell what they are looking at, but as the car draws nearer to the big black shape in the middle of the road, it starts to look like a mass of fur. Jim thinks it must be an animal, but it looks big enough to do damage to his car, so he slows down and stops the car about 20 feet away from the thing. At this point, it is completely illuminated by his headlights, but neither he nor his passengers can figure out what the hell kind of animal it might be. Since it hasn't moved, they assume it must be dead and start to argue over who will drag it over to the side of the road. That's when the thing starts to move. They all fall silent and watch as it stirs, then suddenly stands up. Jim would always preface the next part of the story with, "I know this sounds crazy, but..." He says he can't really describe what he saw, because he had never seen anything like it before. The closest he can come is this. The thing, whatever it was about 7 feet tall when it rose to its full height. Its body was shaped like a human male, but it was covered with a thick, dark fur. The head, he said, and I watched the goosebumps break out on his arms as he said it, was not human. It looked almost like a jackal or a German shepherd, with a long snout and pointed ears, and its eyes were glowing in the headlights the way that a cat's eyes sometimes glow. It was staring right at them. Jim doesn't know how long he stared back at the thing before he noticed that it was clutching a dead rabbit in one of its enormous hands. Pause. He had barely had time to register this bit of information when the creature suddenly flung the dead rabbit away and took a step toward the teenagers in the car. Everyone screamed, and Jim slammed the car into reverse, made a U-turn, and got the hell out of there. Needless to say, they didn't make it to the party that night.